welcome to Writing the Rapids, the show where I, Joe Bielecki, talk to writers about writing. Very often those writers are suggested to me by writers who have been on the show. The writer on the show this episode is Mike Corrao. He's the author of 2 novels, Man, Oh Man and Gut Text, 1 book of poetry, 2 novels, 2 plays, SMUT-MAKER and ANDROMEDUSA, and 2 chapbooks, AVIAN Funeral March and SPELUNKER. Along with earning multiple Best of the Net nominations, Mike's work has been featured in publications such as 3am, Collagist, Always Crashing, and the Portland Review. His work often explores the haptic, architectural, and organismal qualities of the text object. He lives in Minneapolis. Before we get on with the show proper, I feel like I should let you know that if you want to support the show, you can do so in 2 ways, with a one-time donation at paypal.me/noisemakerjoe, or a recurring donation that comes with goodies, depending on your donation level, at patreon.com/noisemakerjoe. Now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Mike. So how does one get from Man, Oh Man to SMUT-MAKER?
I do not know. It was very unplanned. I think I get bored very easily, and so I kind of liked that French form, or kind of like romanticized French form in Man, Oh Man, where it's just like 2 people talking about different like philosophers and writers and all of that. And then I kind of, in like college, all professors kept telling me that I was good at dialogue, so I was like, oh, I'll just only do dialogue if that's the thing I'm good at. And then I kind of started playing around more, because that, you might imagine, got very boring after writing a whole book that was just dialogue. And so I just started kind of playing with form, and I found Inside the Castle, and I liked their idea of like text as object and like page as surface, and started playing around with that, with like gut text, and a piece I did after that called Rituals Performed in the Absence of Ganymede that's coming out next year, and it just kind of descended into whatever chaos from there. But SMUT-MAKER is a lot of John Treffry did most of the design for that.
Okay.
I had kind of sent him this raw manuscript that was really inspired by Antwerp by Bolaño. I don't know if you're familiar with it. But
I haven't read that, but I've read Bolaño.
Yeah, there's it's such a like tangential inspiration, but it's he had done this kind of format on a couple of the pages that would be like a quotation and then an ellipses and then the next quotation. He would just kind of chain those together. And I really liked the idea of doing a whole book of that, and so I did. And then John was like, hey, can I like play around with this a bit more? And I think Mike Klein and him were talking during that Inside the Castle reading in Kansas a while back. And Mike Klein was like, oh, it should be in color. And I was like, yeah, I'm not going to say no to that. And it was a really good sign, because when John started the formatting, he asked me if the sentences need to be in order or not. And I was like, that's an incredible question to be asked about your book as the formatting starts. And of course I said, no, they don't. He kind of made those incredible spreads.
So much of me wants to get published by him just to really understand what it's like to be published by him.
It's great. It's I think that he said that me and Grant with Parapet had the most tedious books that he's worked on, I think. Because I really just gave him raw text, and he was like, can I play with this? And I was like, yeah, go wild. But it's really fun, because you're kind of like a step back, and then you'll start getting these like screenshots, or at least I just kept getting screenshots that just got me super excited, because I would be like, oh, that's what you did to that page. But he's also super receptive. Like we like talked through kind of like page dimensions and how we wanted each act to be displayed, and kind of like what the inspirations were. And so he gives you like as much say as he can, and then he's like, okay, I have my list of criteria, and then he just kind of runs off with it.
That's so cool.
But, yeah.
In the past months, I've been listening to old Harlan Ellison interviews, and he screams about editors, especially with writing TV, how they're like, what if this character was a woman? He's like, if I wanted that character to be a woman, I would have written a woman. And like the editor-writer relationship is so on its head over there.
Yeah. And I feel like I'm so ambivalent about editors, because on one hand, I'm like, I made the book a certain way, and that's how I want it. But also, editors like John or Andrew from 1111 are super cool, because I like editors who are like, I see what you want to do, and I see what you're trying to do. Let's take it like a step further. Or like, this could be more intense or chaotic. Like they kind of just present that avenue to make it a more potent version of what you gave them.
Yeah. Which kind of seems like that's what editors are supposed to do.
Yeah, it's what they're supposed to, but then you get some kind of like large financial apparatus backing it that has like high stakes. Editors suck when the stakes are high. Editors are great when there's no stakes. I think that's kind of the takeaway. Because John and Andrew aren't like, oh, like if we make this edit, it might lose us $10,000 or some amount of money. They're not like trying to get that kind of broad appeal that television editors want.
Well, and that's what makes them so successful. I mean, as far as indie publishers go these days, they're kind of the ones to go to, it seems, in my experience. But that could just be the writing that I'm paying attention to.
Yeah, that's I was thinking about that the other day too, because I feel like every book I've ordered in the last like 6 months has been like a small press book, so my judgment's clouded. But I'm like, oh, of course I want to read like the new like Apocalypse Party book or the new like Dostoevsky wannabe book. I'm not really like paying attention to like whatever Penguin is putting out and stuff, which maybe a lot more, well, not maybe, but a lot more people are. But it's kind of interesting how it feels kind of like music, where you're like, I know I like the stuff this label puts out, so I'll pay attention to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder if there are people who like watch Penguin.
That would be, I imagine that's exhausting, because they probably have like an absurd output, being as big as they are.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, there's 30 books I need to buy this month from Penguin that are new releases.
I had a writing professor in college who talked about how he would read like the New York Times book reviews, but like there's no way I can read all those books.
No, that just seems exhausting. I've gotten so picky. Like I'm like, I will only read something if I think I'll like it, which it seems obvious, but I feel like, because I also do a lot of book reviews, and it's like I'm not going to ask for a copy of something that I don't think I'm going to love, because then what's the point to be like, well, this isn't for me. Like that's not an interesting review.
Yeah.
And not like a fun experience as a reader. And so I've just been so like selective about what I've been reading.
Sure. Let's talk about your book reviews, because we talked about that in DMs briefly, or you brought it up. And the idea of like talking about other people's works. And I've seen people talking about that on Twitter recently, sort of bemoaning the lack of good book reviews, or book reviews even at all. So what's that process like for you? I'll like, after I kind of get a hold of the book, I'll just kind of read through it and take, usually for like 100 to like 250 page book, I end up with like 10 pages of notes as I'm reading, just like pulling quotes and observations. And then I try to make it like less of like how good the book is. Like I don't care about like quality as much as I'm interested in like kind of what kind of experience I had reading, and what kind of like, I don't want to be so far as to say like theoretical, but what kind of like ideas came out of it as I was reading, kind of like what came as a result of an encounter with a book. I saw that I had like a piece come out the other day on the Action Books blog, and I really liked Johannes Goranson called it a topographical reading, which I think is really interesting. Like it's more an encounter with the surface rather than being like, well, this one's a 3 out of 5 for me, because like that doesn't really mean anything. I'd rather understand like what kind of experience someone had with the book, rather than being like, here's what I liked. I'd rather hear them be like, this made me think of this, or like for example, with like Monster, the Olivia Cronk book that I reviewed on the Action Books blog, being like the ekphrasis I thought did something interesting, or being like these images started this always had this really interrogative like quality to it, like having this kind of understanding of the text rather than just being like, that was cool. Yeah. Yeah, I mean that certainly helps you interrogate your own writing better too, I think.
Yeah, there was I don't remember who it was from, but there was a tweet that I saw when I was like first starting to do reviews a year or two ago that was like, if you don't consider reviews part of your own body of work, then they're not good reviews. And I kind of really took that to heart, that like you shouldn't just do it as this like throwaway networking tactic or like way to get more of your work published, but as like a really kind of helpful way to engage with other texts and ideas and see kind of what you can extract for them for your own work. Because I feel like doing reviews has been so useful for kind of learning what I'm interested in, what ideas that I'm like drawn towards and that I want to explore in my own work. Um, it reminds me of like, who is it? I know there's like how Blanchot would infect his own, like the few novels that he did with like the theory that he was writing out, or how the psychoanalyst like Julia Kristeva would do detective novels using the psychoanalytic terms that she was trying to like map out in her theory texts. Like I like the idea of that nonfiction and fiction kind of like playing with each other and working off each other in your own body of work.
Yeah.
Which I know you have the body noir.
Yeah.
I think I thought, which it seems like a, and let me know if I'm wrong, but it's like a tender body horror or like an intimate body horror.
Yeah, it's the horror of the body itself. So yeah, it's like rather than like a parasite coming into you, your body is the parasite itself.
Yeah, which is great. I remember that series of tweets that you had where it's like body noir is whatever and body noir is this.
Yeah.
And even I think that a lot of people like the romantic idea of being like inspired by another author or like another text, but I think it's a lot more interesting to like latch on to all these kind of like microscopic sources. Like I thought that was really cool, or I'll like get inspiration from like some random YouTube video that I'm listening to as I work, or just like grabbing all these kind of minute sources and pulling them in.
Yeah.
Which I think might be a lot of the cost to the chaos of my work, is having maybe like hundreds of different inspirations that I've forgotten most of. But I remember reading those tweets, and then for like the next week I was like, how can I make like intimate body horror stuff?
Yeah.
And thinking about it.
I like to go back with that idea and then think about the things that I've read before that are body noir, like Binary Star by Sarah Gerard. Like I would call
like
that
the retroactive labeling. Yeah. I like that.
I was really into like the sub genre music categorization. Do you know everynoise.com?
Yeah.
So I would just like go through, and there's a scan button on that website, and it plays like 15 seconds of a song that they've categorized as a thing, and there's words I've never heard of, and it goes throughout the world and everything. And
it'll be like lo-fi folk punk or some like 6-word genre title. Yeah. That was fun. I think I found out about that I think it was in like high school or maybe like early college when I found that. I think I spent like just a week going through it and like looking at all the different things I could find that I was like, I have no idea what, or Japanoise. That was my favorite I think I ran into, where I was like, how is Japanoise a large enough genre on its own to like deem a label? And then I started listening to it and I was like, oh, that's actually really interesting.
One of the things that I noticed is how much output you have. You have quite a few books out. You have 4 novels out, 2 chapbooks, more novels forthcoming, lots of short stuff published, poetry, nonfiction. Like, how much do you write?
It varies a lot. Like, I feel like I'm always working on something. It feels very like I get too anxious if I'm not like in the middle of a project, even if that's just like a very short, like 4-line poem or like a whole book. Like there always has to be something pending, but it's like, I'm trying to think of how much I've made since I started, or since like quarantine started, as like an example. I think I've written like 5 short stories and 1 book project that's about 140 pages. And I mean, 140 pages is probably only like 10,000 words because of the design of the book, but I think it's just some kind of inspiration hits, some kind of image sticks out to me, either when I'm like watching something or reading something or playing something, and it kind of just like lingers there, and then I start kind of writing out notes on it. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to say how quick or how much I feel like I don't work that much, because I'll like not work for a day and I'll be like, oh, I'm like barely a writer. Like I haven't done anything today. and then like a month later I'll be like, well, the book is done. And so it's such a kind of like manic like work and non-work kind of flux that it's hard to keep track of.
Well, that's an interesting thing with the like word count to page count sort of thing. I always get really self-conscious about that.
Yeah, I do too. Because I think Man O Man is by word count the longest book I've published, but the shortest by page count. And it's like, I think it's like 34,000 words, and then Gut Text, which is like 60 pages longer, is only 10,000 words. Like it's felt so weird that I'm like, it's the right page count, but is it like, does it count as a book if it's only 10,000 words? And
yeah,
it like feels like I have to hit a certain number.
Yeah, I remember when I was writing my like first novel in this incarnation of me being a writer, and I just like looked up, how long are novels? And some website was like, commercial novels are 80,000 to 100,000 words long. And I was like, all right, we're gonna hit 80.
Yeah.
And I did, and you know, like a lot of my stuff is really kind of dense anyway, where it's like page long paragraphs and stuff like that, where it's a lot more words per page than a lot of the people I read. And I don't know, like it's like, can I even really call it a novel if it's less than 50,000 words? Like I start feeling weird about it, and it's such a weird distinction. Yeah,
I remember I did the same thing, but I kept looking it up and seeing how like short I could get the minimum novel word count to be. And I think I found one that was like 40, and I was like, okay, 40 sounds good. And then Man O Man was like 35, and I was like, that's pretty much 40. Like I kept trying to compromise it because I was like, it has to be a real novel, whatever that dumb term means. And then after Man O Man, I started reading all these weird things like M. Kitchell's work, and I think I went back to like, I'm like looking, I have my bookcase to my side here, so I'm like scanning to see if I can remember. Viki Now's Sheep Machine too. These books where I was like, oh, word count doesn't matter. I was like, I just need to make it like page count long enough.
Yeah.
And so then stuff like Gut Text started happening, where I had all these kind of formal oddities. And I was like, well, 150 is book length, so that's fine.
Yeah, there you go. I had to read it on my phone because your scheduling was kind of last minute, and the book is supposed to get here tomorrow. I'm like, well, that doesn't help me. So I read it on my phone, and I don't know if that changes the experience. I mean, having pages that are black with white text, you know, in a book is so much more satisfying because you get to see all the printer marks.
Yeah, that like ink or excess. Yeah.
What program do you use to write?
For a long time, I just used Word. And then recently, because I started doing some design work, I've been using InDesign.
Okay.
But I think I only used InDesign for the most recent project. And so, like, everything that's come out so far has been through Word, except for SMUT-MAKER, because I think John primarily uses InDesign. But
sure,
all of that has just been me jury-rigging Word to do something resembling what I wanted to.
Okay. Do you have the margins set up like in the book format that you envision, or is it just like...
Yeah, I always write in... It's the first thing I figure out is page dimensions. And my partner always makes fun of me because I'll tell her about a project I'm working on, and I'm like, okay, it's 6x9. And she's like, but what's it about? And I'm like, I always start with the page dimensions to be like, let me contextualize it for you. You need to know how big it is when you hold it.
Okay. See, as I was reading Gut Text, I was wondering if that was the case, because some of the pages just kind of look like they had to have been made with that in mind. So
yeah, it's always like the first thing that comes to mind is I'm like, I need to know how big it will be when I hold it, because that'll determine like how I want a design to look. Like if I have a big page, like a 6x9 book, then a design can be more intricate. But if I have like a small, say like 3x7 book, then I want it to be kind of like a more minimalist image. And so it just like it kind of informs how I put the book together. Because I like each page to be, I don't like one page bleeding into the next per se. Like I don't like the idea of like starting a paragraph on page 1 and ending on page 2. Like I like the idea of each page being its own kind of singular unit. And so Gut Text was made kind of with the idea that each page had exactly the info I wanted to be on that page.
Yeah.
which is, I think, why in like NN, you'll see that like, excuse me, in NN there's they'll only take up like half or 3/4 of a page, because I wanted each kind of bracket of information to be together, and I didn't want anything from the next to be there. And that's happened a lot more recently now that I've kind of honed in on this more design-oriented style. So like with the project I have coming out in January, Rituals Performed in the Absence of Ganymede, I rewrote that whole thing and relaid out that whole thing after I got InDesign, just to be like, okay, I like the idea that I can, before I put the book out, because InDesign displays your pages as spreads, and so you see like left and right next to each other, and so it was really nice to be like, okay, this is the spread that they'll see when they read the book physically, versus Word you kind of have to guess and rig it to like kind of look like it'll be, and even then you'll end up with the gutter margins will be on the outside, and you'll have this kind of like faux understanding of how it'll look to the reader.
Yeah, that's good. I have the Adobe Suite. I might have to start doing that. I remember someone could probably go back and listen to earlier episodes of this podcast where I sort of flippantly say, oh, maybe someday I'll write a book in InDesign, because just like thinking about like House of Leaves, because I had probably just read that like right around the time of starting this podcast, and really starting to understand how books can actually be. Yeah. Like that book is such a jumping off point, I feel.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I feel like a lot of experimental writers kind of scoff at that book. They're like, oh, House of Leaves. But it's such a good kind of introduction to these more design-oriented projects. I think I read that in like freshman year of college, and I was like, oh, this is great. And it kind of got me, I was like, what other books are like this? Like, it's such a good kind of way to get people interested in kind of the potential of what books can be.
Yeah.
But writing a book in InDesign is weird. It feels like you're not really writing to a certain extent. It feels like you're more just like putting something together. Like it feels like you're designing the book rather than writing it, even though you're like putting new text into the page.
Well, I think it's interesting to think about writing a book from the perspective of design. I have a bunch of sticky notes underneath where you can see me, and I think on one of them it says something like, what if I took the design principles and wrote a book with those in mind? So repetition, symmetry, balance, all that stuff. Because I took a document design class in college, so we were like using InDesign to make brochures and posters and things like that, and we even laid out an ebook because we just took like stuff from the Creative Commons or public domain and laid out our own book and put it on Lulu. And like that idea of specifically picking your font and picking the size and stuff, but like what if you go crazy and end up with something like Gut Text or SMUT-MAKER?
I think I really like the idea of it because it's like making a book that has to be a book. It feels much more intentional. Something like I'm trying to think of a good something like Blanchot or like Cervantes or like a Victorian novel can all like exist as an ebook or anywhere, and you're like, I get generally the same experience. There might be like less of that romanticized like holding the book to experience it, but like you don't truly need it to be a book in your hands. But I like the idea of kind of making something that it feels like if you don't have the physical object, something's missing. Like it's something that you can just have in your home. Like I hate the term like sculpture object because it feels so like art pretentious, but this thing that like feels like it was built more than just kind of like printed out.
Yeah. Well, I'm right there with you.
And I think when I was talking to Logan Berry, who runs Runaways Lab in Chicago, which is this really cool theater company, I use the term spatial reading or environmental reading. Like I like the idea of navigating a text and kind of moving through it rather than just like looking at the page and scanning the words.
Do you think your background in film has informed how you write books?
A little bit. I think more than anything, it's kind of given me, I take a lot of inspiration from visuals rather than from things that I read. And I think that's a lot to do with film. I'll kind of like watch videos or movies or play a game, and I will take inspiration from that rather than kind of looking back through whatever writers I'm really drawn towards. When I worked on film stuff, I mainly worked in kind of like a writing and directorial role. I don't have much of like a mechanical background, but I think it gave me a really kind of, it places emphasis on like the image rather than the narrative, because a lot of the films I worked on were like 30 seconds long or 2 minutes long. They were all these very kind of condensed short form pieces that were really abstract.
Okay. My background in film is tangential. I have a broadcasting degree, but a lot of people, the way that Grand Valley State University works is their broadcasting classes, at least when I went there, they've since merged broadcasting and journalism degrees together into one thing, which I think has sort of neutered the entire technical aspect of it and is more just actually journalism, but here's how to run a camera, because you'll have to if you want to be a journalist. But there was a class, the PBS affiliate in Grand Rapids is run out of one of the buildings for GVSU. So one of their classes was in that studio, run by the director who directed like a third of the shows. So it was essentially the training course to be an intern. And for whatever reason, a lot of film people have ended up working for that station as well. So the stuff that when they let the inmates run the asylum, the stuff that we make is very much more film oriented than just like put somebody on one half of the screen, and so the image can be up there and the lower third doesn't cut their face off and and whatnot.
That's where I went. I went to University of Minnesota, and I got it's Studies in Cinema and Media Culture is the name of the film degree. And a lot of people go into it being like, okay, I'm going to be a filmmaker, but it's like 90% theory. And they're like, oh, well, I guess you might want to know how to run a camera too. We'll throw in like a couple practice courses. And so you go in thinking like, oh, I'm going to make a bunch of short films. And you're like, well, now I really understand Leotard, and I've read a little Deleuze, and like you just have a bunch of these obscure like theoretical terms in your head.
Yeah. I think I would have liked that better. I think that I wanted more like media theory, because in my mind you could make broadcasting like a 2-year trade course. You don't need to go to a 4-year university. It takes you 6 months to get used to running a in-studio camera, and a lot of them are, at least a lot of the TV stations in town here in Grand Rapids have mechanical cameras anyway, so you're not even running a camera, you're just moving a joystick around. So like I want to know why we do news the way we do news, and not just like, hey, okay, so this is what we do. This is how you run a Chiron machine. Not like, why do we design things the way we design? Yeah,
and I had a friend who was in the program too, who was complaining that there weren't enough practice courses, and I was like, I love it. Like, the only practice course I actually took was like screenwriting, because I didn't want to take any. I was like, I just want to engage with all of like the kind of theoretical texts. And so there were these really great courses on like oppositional cinema that deals with like alienating the viewer and creating these like really jarring viewing experiences, like the Surrealists did, and a lot of like the post-60s Godard films, and like others on like paranoia and like 70s American cinema. And I took one on like even television, and I think I did my capstone on like scarcity mechanics in certain video games. And so I tried to I kind of contorted it into this almost like cultural theory degree, like focused on media rather, while everybody else was like, okay, I'm going to take as many practice courses as they'll let me.
Yeah. I mean, so much of that stuff you learn on the fly. I kept, in the first couple years of post-college working at various TV and radio stations, I kept saying, okay, what's the terminology I need to know? Like, when you say a trombone, what do you mean by trombone? Because like none of that was covered in school.
Yeah. And it's funny because a lot of there's also, I can't remember the name of it, but in Minneapolis, there's like an independent film school and it's like 1 to 2 year programs, and people come out of there with way better understanding of like how to be a filmmaker, or how to kind of deal with the mechanical aspects of filmmaking than these people at like in the media studies degree who have like 4 year degrees and took all of these courses, and they're like, what's a gaffer? And you're like, what do you mean, what's a gaffer?
Yeah. Oh man. So I also recently read Spelunker, and do you play Dwarf Fortress at all?
A little bit, I do.
Okay. Because
there's a little bit of like Dwarf Fortress and Caves of Quud in there.
Yeah, because before it started getting occult and crazy, I was like, I wonder if I make my Dwarf Fortress base with these dimensions, what will happen?
I love that. I love that kind of like ASCII graphic style as an aesthetic like that, and like low poly kind of PS1 style graphics are always this really like alluring set of like images to me. They have this kind of like occult and a noble side. Like it's rudimentary in this really like uncanny way that you're thinking about like what's behind the surface of those really rudimentary images. And things like Dwarf Fortress like obviously ask you to think of those ASCII graphics as something way more complex. I remember there's this funny anecdote that one of the developers was talking about where they kept getting complaints that like everybody in Dwarf Fortress was saying there's all these dead cats in their bar, and they're like, we have to figure out why these dead cats are in our bar. And it was because of some absurd thing, like there was a mechanic they added where alcohol could drip out of people's cups and get on the floor, and each creature's feet had like an absorption rate, and so these cats were getting alcohol absorbed into their feet and like dying from like alcohol poisoning. And so the way that all of these mechanics add up to just these absurd outcomes is really interesting to me. I know that the developers talk about like emergent narratives, where like the player is creating their own story, and I think I've taken a lot of that into my own work because I like the idea of kind of the video gamey text where you feel like you're more active in your role, like you feel like you get a say in how the book comes out. Like in a recent project I was trying to incorporate like dice rolls and kind of other probability things that when you come back you get to kind of like have a slightly different experience. And I've started writing the second person a lot more because of that. Because in an albeit like superficial way, it feels like you're more directly engaging with the text.
Yeah.
And so the Ganymede book that's coming out in January is written the second person, where like you as the reader and I as the text itself. And it's kind of like this back and forth between you and it as you try to kind of solve the issues of the body being such a fragile vessel.
Yeah. That's good. I'm glad I was on the right track there. I couldn't believe when I talked
100%.
I couldn't believe when I talked to B.R. Yeager about negative space that he'd never heard of Brigand before.
Oh man,
it blew my mind. Like, no, you're writing about the town. You're writing about a thing there's 2 movies about.
I love the Dwarf Fortress assessment because I had sent something to Schism, and he was Gary was like, I already am kind of booked for the next like year and a half, but I'm doing this new division of the press called Neuronics, which is going to be open access titles, like PDF downloads. Would that interest you? And I was like, this book feels too physical. Can I make something new for you and come back in like a month or two? And he was like, yeah, of course. And so I made Spelunker. And he was like, this is great. And when do you want to go it up? And just threw it up. But I that's like a piece that I really like, the idea of making something that is written to be a PDF. And so like the pages are black with white text, so it's less harsh on your eyes when it's a screen. And I made them square pages, so no matter what device you're on, like you're viewing a whole page at once, like it scales properly, and added a lot of kind of primarily visual elements, kind of trying to make it this thing that's really accessible to read on a screen, whether it's like a phone or a desktop. And then, of course, that kind of being digital also naturally felt like I should start talking about like boundary clipping and all these kind of speed running tactics.
Yeah, I liked the idea that you were kind of exploring a program that had been procedurally generated, and then it started like doing its own thing. be into that. I mean, so much of the like anxiety about artificial intelligence is that, right? That it'll just be like, well, I'm a paperclip making machine, but if I kill all humans, then I'll be able to make so many more paperclips.
Yeah. And I like neural networks are really funny to me because you're like, you can teach a neural network to do something, but you don't know the logic of why it is correct when it answers correctly.
Yeah.
Like you can show it, you can be like, I want a neural network that can identify pictures of wolves. And you'll show it like a bunch of pictures and it'll say that'll look at a white wolf and say, that's a wolf. But then it'll see a picture of like a desert and be like, that's a wolf too, because it's white. Yeah. Like the logic is always so unknowable. And so I like the idea of this program that you fed all this architectural data. And it's like, oh, I noticed all this occult numerology in the architecture. That has to be part of architecture. And so it starts feeding that into its kind of like layouts that it's making.
Yeah. Philosophy Tube did a video on that, on data collection and artificial intelligence. And I think that maybe it's intentional or not, but like Spelunker kind of offers the same idea without adding the fear of like, yeah, the government's doing this same thing right now.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember if I wrote that before or after quarantine. It's so hard to tell timelines now. But I feel like kind of during that period, I started shifting into exploring those like digital spaces a lot more. Maybe because everyone's in their forced hermitage. But it feels like such a like prominent part of everyday life. I think about like how much time I sit at the computer or like am on my phone that it feels like weird not to have pieces that spend so much time in these like abstract like digital spaces.
Yeah.
But and it feels like still like such a great unknown that it's like all the vastness of this like internet environment, that there's all these places that you don't know exist, or that it's creating new spaces so quickly that you can't keep up.
Yeah.
That you run into something and you just don't understand like the logic behind it or like the rules that it's operating within.
Yeah, well, that's what's so satisfying to me about works like Spelunker or Amygdalatropolis, the like forcing magic back into the internet. Because it feels so consolidated. It really feels like you could get everything you need from the internet off of Reddit and Twitter and YouTube. Like, you really only need 3 websites, but there's so much more out there, and there's, you know, people with crazy ideas doing things. I posted that link to the 973 The Human website a couple weeks ago. That is like a really strangely formatted dictionary of chaos magic. And it's like, why are we creating this? Why are we doing this?
Yeah, or there's I think it's called jody.org, which is just this site that you like, it's a bunch of kind of ASCII type graphics on a web page, and it's constantly shifting colors. You can click different places on each page, but you don't quite know like where you should be clicking or where it'll lead to. Like, it's just this labyrinth that you have no means of kind of mapping out properly.
Oh dear. Oh yeah, I'm on it right now.
Yep. Yeah. And some like it'll try to download files onto your computer if you have it like allowed, and it'll have pop-ups, and it's just this like frantic site that's made to just fuck with you.
Huh.
I think Jake Reber showed it to me because we were talking and he it, and I was like, oh, I don't know what that is, and he's like, oh, you don't know what this is, and he sent me the link, and I was like, what am I doing? What am I like looking at? But
man, imagine trying to map that out.
Yeah, I'm kind of tempted to, and then releasing it without context would be great. They'd be like, okay, here's your way through the maze, and they're like, what maze?
Oh man, I want to show this to my wife. She's been working as a web designer for the past couple years.
Might give her a heart attack if you.
Oh my god. Yeah, I'm gonna pull it up on her laptop and just close her laptop, and next time she has to get on it, just what is going on? Oh no, that tangent. That's totally ruptured my brain because now all I want to think about is strange websites.
It's tempting, and there's so many.
Are you familiar with Gnome books at all? They publish like the anonymous or like pseudonymized.
I just actually finished what is it? Geophilosophical Branding by More Cozy. But there's a lot of really interesting stuff from them.
Yeah.
I know Electron Frass and ODS have books out through them.
Okay. I didn't know that. What's your opinion? Because obviously you write under your name. What do you think about like putting something else out without, your name attached to it? Do you think that would change the way it's consumed by the reader?
To a certain extent, yes, but I don't know if I'm kind of notable enough to have too much like kind of prior kind of framing attached to my name.
Sure.
But I'm not opposed to it. I've tried to do it a couple times in the past, but pieces ended up not getting picked up. They were all book length when I tried to do it. I have a bit of like over publishing anxiety. That I'm like, am I putting too many things out, or like if I try to do another thing this year, is that too much? And so I've definitely considered doing stuff pseudonymously, but just nothing's caught yet.
Okay.
Gnome books is always a tempting option, though.
Yeah.
That kind of like esoteric, like simplistic book cover, like old. I think they have like a Blogspot site that they're selling out of.
Mm-hmm.
There's kind of this like archaic interest in it.
I remember listening to an interview with one of the guys from the metal band Full of Hell, and he was talking about some record label he knew out in Carolina that like only puts out cassette tapes. And that idea is so fascinating to me that like you only get this if you really want it. Like you as the consumer have to work to consume this. Which is like the most radical thing you can do these days is force people to come to you.
Yeah, I like that kind of like inaccessibility to a certain extent. I know a couple writers who I've talked to about working in like essentially using like shitty technology to make their work. Like I have a friend who will make his books using like 2003 PowerPoint, or another guy who only does his images in like MS Paint. Like I love the idea of utilizing anachronistic technology, because I think it, at least on like the kind of creating end of it, gives you such a limited tool set and these like nice constraints that you're like, I want to do this, but how do I do it? And then kind of in that process of figuring out how to do it, you make something completely different that's still really interesting. But putting out in like an anachronistic way is really interesting too. I know that what's his name, Milo the rapper, still does like a lot of cassettes and kind of outmoded forms. And I know vinyl is coming back, if that even counts as outmoded at this point.
Yeah, I don't think vinyl ever really left. I think that's kind of a marketing technology tactic. But yeah, it's been interesting to see Milo's philosophy on cassettes change as he's as he's sort of changed his whole thing.
Yeah,
because there's an interview where he was putting things that happen at day and things that happen at night on cassette, and he was just kind of like, it's kind of funny. All my friends have bad cars anyway, so putting out MP3s is kind of doesn't really help because they can't listen to it in their car. To now where he's like only putting things out on cassettes and kind of using the fact that you can't track skip to extend the form of the rap song and things like that.
And there's like a certain intimacy to those technologies that you have to, it's so deliberate when you do it. Like you have to get the cassette tape, put it in and like sit there and listen to it versus just like kind of like innocuously throwing something on Spotify in the background as you're doing something else. Yeah. Like it makes you engage so much more directly.
Well, and his music requires that too.
Oh yeah. He's one of the people that I listen to when I work a lot. It's
really?
Like, I try to listen to really distracting stuff when I'm working. So like, I'll do like him, or like I'll do abrasive music like Death Grips or noise music or jazz. A lot of Sun Ra.
He's coming back. He's going on tour.
How's he doing that?
I have no idea. I saw an article about that. I didn't read it, but yeah, he's coming back. He's making new music and.
It seems like they've just been reshuffling the same like songs onto different albums for the last couple of years now.
Sure. Well,
but
they do
he's
things
got
different
enough,
in Jupiter.
So, yeah. I'm curious to see if it's him or the orchestra that are coming back. But I guess we'll just have to stay tuned.
Your comment about overpublishing is interesting to me, as a person who hasn't quite gotten published yet. That, like... And I was talking about trying to make a living with Zach on the last episode. And I've been viewing books as, like, buying stock in a company that pays dividends. Where it's like, well, the more I have out there, it's not going to make me any money right now. But in 30 years, if I have 50 books, that's better than having 5, because a person who finds my work and engages with it will have 49 other books to buy.
Yeah. And I think that it's, with being like pretty young going into this, I just turned 24 2 weeks ago. Being like, am I going to regret all of these things that I've put out in like 4 years when I think I know better? And it's also, I'm worried that it's like, I put out 3 books in a year, and by the time it gets to book number 3, people are like, okay, I've had enough. Like, I'll skip this. It feels like it removes, at least in the present, I think you're very right about like the kind of stock assessment, but in the present it feels like it removes that like immediate excitement or value from the text, that it's like, oh, another Mike book is out.
Sure.
But at the same time, I've been working pretty quickly and I am impatient, so I don't want to, if I sit on a book for 3 years, it feels less special than if I sit on a book for 6 months.
Yeah. Well, just write longer books, I guess. I don't know.
I guess so. I've been stuck in that like 100 to 200 page range. I guess I should work my way up.
Well, it's a very comfortable range for people. I mean, these days, what was it? It was Kingshot Press when they opened briefly their submissions. They said they only wanted like 10 to 30,000 word books. We want it to be read by working class people on the bus to work, which is a nice thing. And I feel like if you write something that's like 1,000 pages long, like the length itself is performative.
Yeah, totally. And I feel like I'm almost kind of like 100 pages or 1,000 pages feels like the 2 ideal options.
Yeah.
It's like movies where it's like, I don't want a 2.5 or a 3 hour movie. I want a 90-minute movie or a 5-hour movie. Like I either want it to be like a condensed experience or something that's like really excessive and large.
Yeah.
And I feel like I really like that 100 to 150 page range, because if you have the time, you can even do that in one sitting. Especially for something that's like 10,000 words across those 150 pages.
Oh yeah.
And it almost acts in like that kind of cinematic way where you're engaging with it all at once, which I really like. Like you don't have time to kind of sit and deliberate and like think about it between different like reading sessions. You have to kind of get through it, and then at the end you're like, okay, what was that experience like?
Yeah. It's a strange way to approximate like not only what kind of story the reader wants, but how they're going to consume it. Because I don't know too many people who are going to like walk away from a movie halfway through and then come back to it later.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why I've kind of taken that more design-oriented approach, is like, you're like, oh, well, I can read more because this page doesn't have that much on it. And like I don't know about you, but when I read, I'm looking at how much I have to go through on each page to determine if I keep going. And so I think having that kind of like varied density really helps in like keeping people there in the moment.
Yeah, for sure. I remember reading Malloy for the first time and it's like, wait, oh no. This is what this is going to be.
How do I start? Truly, yeah. I think I revisited that pretty recently too, and I was like, oh, I forgot. Like I forgot that this is what this is like. That you just have to hunker down and get through it. And it's great, but it's such a like an endurance test to get through that now for me.
100%. And that was before I started putting sticky notes in books by like a year or two. And like, I always want to reread the bit about the stones. It's so perfect. It's like the best thing anyone's ever written. It's so obsessive and perfect. I'm like, well, so I gotta move this stone, then move that stone. That like, and I can't find it in the book. So if I'm gonna find it, I'm gonna just have to reread the book again now.
Yeah, and I love the way that he does excess, because in like Watt he has that scene that's like he looks from like the window to the wall to the door to the window to the wall, and it goes on for like 400 words of just being like his eyes, like where his eyes are looking around the room. There's like a really fun way to play with excess in that. And I think that a lot of his work kind of in that degree has like an interesting type of like scanning that you're not going to read that whole thing, but you look at it and you think about how there's just this like long moment where he's just darting his eyes around.
Yeah.
And I like the idea of like text that you aren't kind of specifically meant to be reading, but you can just look at it and understand it.
I think I read, or I saw, I didn't actually read it. I think I saw a thing with regard to SMUT-MAKER about distracted reading. Am I remembering that right?
Yeah. Yeah. You can just, so we had put the book together with, it's a 72-act play, and so each act is a 2-page spread, so you're just kind of looking at it all at once.
Mm-hmm.
And we specifically kind of made it so you're not reading like top left, down page, and up again, going to the bottom right, that you can just like look at that page and your eyes latch onto what you want, and then you just move on to the next. Like it's just this surface, like engagement with a surface. And distracted reading is highly encouraged, because then you just latch on to what really is important, and maybe the thing that's distracting you is informing how you're engaging with the text and what you're latching onto in each act.
The other thing I had specifically written down to ask you, especially with some of the stuff I've read recently that just has the word text repeating over and over and over. Do you copy paste, or do you write each one out?
I copy paste.
Okay.
I'm lazy, I have to admit it.
No, it's fine. There's MoMA has this fairly pretentious guy who sometimes puts out videos through their channel about like, here's how this person paints their paintings. And the things that he makes look always never like how that person paints, but it's a good case study in like learning to oil paint, learning like mediums and different techniques and things like that. But there's some artist who has lots of little sort of U-shaped brush strokes, and she changes the amount of oil or like other mediums that she puts in the paint as she makes it. And so I was wondering if it's like a meditative thing for you to write text over and over and over again.
No, I think that for those, I kind of treat it like a minimalist image, that I'm just like, okay, here's the part where just the word text goes, and then I tend to spend a lot more time on kind of the more non-language based design parts. So like in gut text, like arranging, well, in gut text it's a little different with the text section, and I think it's FF, with those kind of like scattered blotches. It was very intentional in like the placement of those and in the kind of like increased density. And so I think I spend a lot more meditative time arranging things, because I'm like, this looks good, but it doesn't look good enough. And then I keep kind of nitpicking it, and it'll end up being like the same page count and the same word count. And it's like, but I've moved the large black circle like a little bit higher up on the page, which is great. Like it's always these very like seemingly unimportant things that I get stuck on.
That informs how I read your work an awful lot going forward now, which I think is very useful. Man, because you also put like diagrams in there and things like that.
Yeah.
Too. Huh. I don't know. I might have to go back and reread some things now. One thing I noticed, and it's just a little thing. I think it might have to do with the fact of how much you write, like so fast. But the word rhizome appears in so much of your work.
It appears too much. But I read a lot of Deleuze and Guattari, which I think is why that happened. But I liked the idea of, like, I think it informs also how I view a lot of the work, is like the rhizome as this labyrinth without a start point or end point.
Yeah.
That is just this kind of chaotic network of corridors that you're meandering or kind of wandering through, which just really interests me. But in a similar point, I also like the idea of creating these like portals between pieces, like the Mike Corrao cinematic universe, but in a way making it so that those connections don't make any sense. Like the character of AU in Gut Text was originally named Man-O-Man, all one word.
Oh,
and it's like, that's great, but it doesn't make any sense that that's like,
Sure.
they're like, on the surface you're like, the two-headed character in this book is Man-O-Man, like in the other one. But then you're like, why are they here? They have no purpose to be here. It's supposed to be two different people, and like all of these connections are forming, but they don't make any sense.
Yeah. Oh, I'm actually for that. I remember being so happy right around the time Lonely Men Club was coming out that Mike Klein just tweeted, like, all of my books are in the same universe.
Yeah.
Like, oh, good. So every time Godzilla appears, it's the same Godzilla.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that. And that goes back to me as a kid reading so much high fantasy stuff where it's there's no one-off books. Everything's a trilogy, and then that trilogy is followed by a trilogy, and it might have different characters, and it might be 100 years later, but the world that gets built. And I'm so excited by the idea that people in our ecosystem right now could be building those worlds that have nothing to do with, you know, European mythology or space. And it just, like, the game Hylix is so interesting to me because it just, like, it feels like it has its own mythology.
Yeah.
But it's completely unlike anything I've ever seen before.
God, I think I have like 10 hours in that game. I just downloaded the second one, actually.
Is it out? Oh, I missed that.
Yeah, it came out on the 22nd, I think. And that one's super cool, not only because like Mason Lindroff is a claymation artist, so like the aesthetic is so interesting, but I think he had said that he used like procedural generation to make the text, and then he would like cut chunks out for the dialogue. And so there's this like weird, really specific like syntax to how all the characters speak that feels so unique. He has on his YouTube channel all of these like walkthroughs of little games that he had made in the past that are so esoteric that like you watch the walkthrough instead of the game because there's like no way you could figure out how the fuck you're supposed to play it.
Yeah.
And they've been such a like very influential kind of like thing for me, like these videos, watching this kind of like this, it's kind of a narrative, but watching this video where it's a walkthrough of a game that you couldn't possibly figure out yourself. And so you're just watching these little figures, like one's called Beachcomber. And so you're just watching this little like figure go around to very specific points in the sand and dig things up that like you don't know what they are. They're just like these weird blobs or artifacts. I actually, a lot of the time recently, I've been working to Japanese playthroughs of Hylix, where it's like this very quiet, like occasional whispering of the player, and then just that kind of weird, unsettling, twangy Hylix music in the background. But I love that you brought that up, because that game, I think I just did another playthrough out of it like 2 weeks ago.
Oh, cool. Have you seen Petscop?
Yeah.
Do you know what that is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, we are like on the same wavelength. Great. Good, because that's the other thing. I want to get that guy on here who made that.
Yeah. The what is it? Garalina? Is that the company from the game?
Yeah.
It would have a representative.
Just those sounds, just the bleep boop sounds.
Yeah.
And he said on his Twitter that he like designed a game and then played the game, recording himself playing it, and then talked over that.
Yeah.
Because that's
and
what yeah, go ahead.
I really like that kind of like what's the word? Like the esoteric procedure of that, where like watching that playthrough where it's like, okay, here are the very specific button prompts. to do to get this like thing to be summoned, or the like pyramid to turn pink.
Mm-hmm.
It's so cool to watch, like, because it feels like something that you could discover on your own. Like it makes the game feel so real that it's like, oh, you played the game, but you just didn't know you had to do this.
Mm-hmm.
To like summon whatever weird ghost.
Yeah, I've been wanting to make a game for a while. I don't know anything about coding. I just like downloaded Unity on a whim, but I want to make a game that like you have to break to actually play it. Like you have to no clip in a place where you shouldn't be able to actually see what the game is supposed to be. And applying that to writing, applying that ideology to books is such an equation to solve.
Yeah.
That like, how can I make a book that's intended to be picked up and read from any page, but at the same time it's bound, you know?
Yeah. I was playing around with this idea a little while ago that I'll probably pick up again sometime, of like a book that tells you how to properly take it apart. Like a book that's almost like AlterCraft, that it's like you need to crumple this page in a very specific way and place it here, and this one crumpled this way and place it here, and cut this page on a diagonal, that it's like by the end you get this just like completely torn apart object, but it's torn apart in like just the very perfect way that it's supposed to be. This is a piece called Becoming Ossuary. Scenario: you are a weeper and the ground is wet. Interior surgical suite performance: we undergo trepanation, your dura mater exposed, and the cut shard placed onto a metal plate. The air is so much louder now. Your skull is whistling with beautiful music, in a rhythmic glitching of foot pedals. The scene. You with your tongue out and eyes crossed. The cut shard belongs in an ossuary. An ossuary is a pile of bones. An ossuary is a small coffin for bones. Entombed. Runer. Performance of funerary rites, beginning with an elaborate march and dance. The dance is built of small actions. They are arranged into a field of choreographies, procedurally generated veneration. The runer leads the march. The cut shard hums in its wooden chest. Hues of pink light. Underneath the surgery there is a cave. The surgery is not over yet. We are still at the suite, looking on. Your dura mater remains exposed. The trepanation is performed with a trephine. Mouth, arms, long, folded, osseberg. It shucks the shell. An endoskeleton is practically an exoskeleton. The only distinction is a thin layer of meat and membrane. Intracellular destruction, annihilation. You play us a beautiful song as we examine your innard. Entombed, runer, leads the march. They hold a quince over your box. This was the fruit of the Garden of Eden. No, a pomegranate. What a lovely thought. They march to the beachhead and bury you in the sand. The ossuary waits there for 64 years. This is a magical number. It is simple numerology. Every year a black dog is thrown into the ocean. What a lovely thought. Interior, surgical suite, performance. The gate guard sits with his back fat scraping the chair back. Splinters root into the unnerved flesh. There is nothing here to hold on to. We thud the trephine against your hard head. The dura mater dries in the open atmosphere. And now you are healthier. You are cured. Runer rattles the ossuary, becoming ossuary. It should have that nice kind of pink blush on the inside. Entombed, runer, and you are a weeper, and the ground is wet, and a gourd is laid on the beachhead in your honor. We envision a great feast. Boiled liver, young capillaries, aged piss. Everything in life is kaput. We have inevitably taken up residence in exclusion zone, weeping in a meadow of sea vegetables, something like wakame or kombu. In the summer they dry into stone trees, and we harvest them for the ossuary. To venerate the march, to summon the runer and visit the beachhead. The rest of the body is expendable. All that we need are the cut shard and the dura mater. Excess material can be discarded, composted, recycled. Make a new skull, grow a new set of materials, like grafting a tree or a patch of skin, milk chocolate or anonymous fluid exchange, and Kitchell. Entombed, runer, the tech on your face is wet. Are you a weeper? Someone asks, out of sight. Interior surgical suite, the tech on your face is replaced, or it is sprayed with a hydrophobic residue. What do you mean? We extract the eyeball carefully and sever the optic nerve when it emerges from the shell and place the eye back in its socket. With the visage of an owl, your tuft and feathery exterior, surgical suite, performance, trampling your feet on the runer's stomach, making them wheeze and crumple. The ground is covered in viscous juice, either pulled from the soil or spit from the mouth. Trepanation is a procedure for creating an unnatural facade. a hallucinatory mise-en-scène, Slavoj Žižek. The small actions of the dance mutate into new mediums, an expanded field of movement. The trephine looks like an egg cracker. The dura mater is a soft white membrane between the shell and the loose gelatin. A cruciferous head blooms from the cut shard opening. You look like a fungal sprout. You smell like sulfur and moss festering. We attempt to sever your connection. Fungus is vilified for its damage, then Woodard. The surgical suite fills with a dense spore cloud. Entombed, Runer. Every particle of dust contributes to calcification. This is the field of stone sculptures, an invitation to the annual beheading. We all look on with glee. Runer lifts the ossuary from a mound of drift and lodges it in the neck of the guillotine and crushes your cut shard into dust. Runer, entombed, what kind of performance is this? What a lovely thought. The trees look like fennel, the grass is short and dead. You are a weeper, looking on your shattered chest. The wood is built into a fire pit. We plan a great feast.